Section 6 of Gray's Anatomy, Part 5. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Michael Evans. Anatomy of the Human Body, Part 5 by Henry Gray. The Lungs. 1e. The Lungs. Pulmones. The lungs are the essential organs of respiration. They are two in number, placed one on either side within the thorax, and separated from each other by the heart and other contents of the mediastinum. The substance of the lung is of a light, porous, spongy texture. It floats in water and crepitates when handled, owing to the presence of air in the alveoli. It is also highly elastic, hence the retracted state of these organs when they are removed from the closed cavity of the thorax. The surface is smooth, shining, and marked out into numerous polyhedral areas, indicating the lobules of the organ. Each of these areas is crossed by numerous tighter lines. At birth, the lungs are pinkish-white in color. In adult life, the color is a dark slaty gray, mottled in patches, and as age advances, this mottling assumes a black color. The coloring matter consists of granules of a carbonaceous substance deposited in the areolar tissue near the surface of the organ. It increases in quantity as age advances, and is more abundant in males than in females. As a rule, the posterior border of the lung is darker than the anterior. The right lung usually weighs about 625 grams, the left 567 grams, but much variation is met with according to the amount of blood or serous fluid they may contain. The lungs are heavier in the male than in the female, their proportion to the body being, in the former, as 1:37, in the latter, as 1:43. Each lung is conical in shape, and presents for examination an apex, a base, 3 borders, and 2 surfaces. The apex, apex pulmonis, is rounded, and extends into the root of the neck, reaching from 2.5 to 4 centimeters above the level of the sternal end of the first rib. A sulcus produced by the subclavian artery as it curves in front of the pleura runs upward and lateralward immediately below the apex. The base, basis pulmonis, is broad, concave, and rests upon the convex surface of the diaphragm, which separates the right lung from the right lobe of the liver, and the left lung from the left lobe of the liver, the stomach, and the spleen. Since the diaphragm extends higher on the right than on the left side, the concavity on the base of the right lung is deeper than that on the left. Laterally and behind, the base is bounded by a thin, sharp margin which projects for some distance into the pharyngo-costal sinus of the pleura, between the lower ribs and the costal attachment of the diaphragm. The base of the lung descends during inspiration and ascends during expiration. The costal surface, fasces costalis, external or thoracic surface, is smooth, convex, of considerable extent, and corresponds to the form of the cavity of the chest, being deeper behind than in front. It is in contact with the costal pleura, and presents, in specimens which have been hardened in situ, slight grooves corresponding with the overlying ribs. The mediastinal surface, fasces mediastinalis, inner surface, is in contact with the mediastinal pleura. It presents a deep concavity, the cardiac impression, which accommodates the pericardium. This is larger and deeper on the left than on the right lung, on account of the heart projecting farther to the left than to the right side of the median plane. Above and behind this concavity is a triangular depression named the hilum, where the structures which form the root of the lung enter and leave the viscus. These structures are invested by pleura, which, below the hilus and behind the pericardial impression, forms the pulmonary ligament. On the right lung, immediately above the hilus, is an arched furrow which accommodates the azygous vein, while running upward and then arching lateralward some little distance below the apex is a wide groove for the superior vena cava and right innominate vein. Behind this, and nearer the apex, is a furrow for the innominate artery. Behind the hilus and the attachment of the pulmonary ligament is a vertical groove for the esophagus. This groove becomes less distinct below, owing to the inclination of the lower part of the esophagus to the left of the middle line. In front and to the right of the lower part of the esophageal groove is a deep concavity for the extrapericardiac portion of the thoracic part of the inferior vena cava. On the left lung, immediately above the hilus, is a well-marked curved furrow produced by the aortic arch, and running upward from this towards the apex is a groove accommodating the left subclavian artery. A slight impression in front of the latter and close to the margin of the lung lodges the left innominate vein. Behind the hilus and pulmonary ligament is a vertical furrow produced by the descending aorta, and in front of this, near the base of the lung, the lower part of the esophagus causes a shallow impression. Borders. The inferior border, margo inferior, is thin and sharp where it separates the base from the costal surface and extends into the phrenicocostal sinus. Medially, where it divides the base from the mediastinal surface, it is blunt and rounded. The posterior border, margo posterior, is broad and rounded, and is received into the deep concavity on either side of the vertebral column. It is much longer than the anterior border and projects below into the phrenicocostal sinus. The anterior border, margo anterior, is thin and sharp and overlaps the front of the pericardium. The anterior border of the right lung is almost vertical and projects into the costo-mediastinal sinus. That of the left presents below an angular notch, the cardiac notch, in which the pericardium is exposed. Opposite this notch, the anterior margin of the left lung is situated some little distance lateral to the line of reflection of the corresponding part of the pleura. Fissures and lobes of the lungs. The left lung is divided into two lobes, an upper and a lower, by an interlobular fissure, which extends from the costal to the mediastinal surface of the lung, both above and below the hilus. As seen on the surface, this fissure begins on the mediastinal surface of the lung at the upper and posterior part of the hilus, and runs backward and upward to the posterior border, which it crosses at a point about 6 centimeters below the apex. It then extends downward and forward over the costal surface, and reaches the lower border a little behind its anterior extremity, and its further course can be followed upward and backward across the mediastinal surface as far as the lower part of the hilus. The superior lobe lies above and in front of this fissure, and includes the apex, the anterior border, and a considerable part of the costal surface and the greater part of the mediastinal surface of the lung. The inferior lobe, the larger of the two, is situated below and behind the fissure, and comprises almost the whole of the base, a large portion of the costal surface, and the greater part of the posterior border. The right lung is divided into three lobes, superior, middle, and inferior, by two interlobular fissures. One of these separates the inferior from the middle and superior lobes, and corresponds closely with the fissure in the left lung. Its direction is, however, more vertical, and it cuts the lower border about 7.5 centimeters behind its anterior extremity. The other fissure separates the superior from the middle lobe. It begins in the previous fissure near the posterior border of the lung, and, running horizontally forward, cuts the anterior border on a level with the sternal end of the fourth costal cartilage. On the mediastinal surface, it may be traced backward to the hilus. The middle lobe, the smallest lobe of the right lung, is wedge-shaped and includes the lower part of the anterior border and the anterior part of the base of the lung. The right lung, although shorter by 2.5 centimeters than the left, in consequence of the diaphragm rising higher on the right side to accommodate the liver, is broader, owing to the inclination of the heart to the left side. Its total capacity is greater, and it weighs more than the left lung. The root of the lung, radix pulmonis. A little above the middle of the mediastinal surface of each lung, and nearer its posterior than its anterior border, is its root, by which the lung is connected to the heart and the trachea. The root is formed by the bronchus, the pulmonary artery, the pulmonary veins, the bronchial arteries and veins, the pulmonary plexuses of nerves, lymphatic vessels, bronchial lymph glands, and areolar tissue, all of which are enclosed by a reflection of the pleura. The root of the right lung